Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 3,500 years back in time. At that time, there was a man called Joshua who was a great example for me. His story is really exciting. Maybe you've heard the story of when Moses and the Israelites left Egypt. They started a long journey towards a country that God had promised to give them. And God could talk to Moses so that he knew exactly what to do on the way. The people experienced amazing miracles, like when God opened up the Red Sea for them. But strangely, the Israelites always started to complain and doubt God when things started getting hard. But Joshua was different. Just like Moses, he was always full of faith in God. Joshua quickly became one of the Israelites' most important warriors. He must have learned a lot from Moses. They set up camp before they came to the land of Canaan.
I have chosen you, 12 strong and brave chieftains, to spy out the land of Canaan for 40 days.
Of course, Joshua was one of the spies, and so was his friend, Caleb.
We will find out everything we need to know about the land God has given us.
No one was allowed to know why they were there, and they didn't give away their plans to anyone. The land was way better than they thought. It was green, with lots of farms, and plenty of food. They took lots of fruit, and a bunch of grapes that were so big that 2 men had to carry it between them. It was so fantastic that they said that
it is a land that flows with milk and honey.
But there was one big challenge in the land. One of the nations that lived there, the Anakim, were much bigger and much taller than anyone the spies had ever seen before.
Those people are actually giants.
Yeah, those cities are going to be really hard to take.
After 40 days, the spies came back to Moses and told what they had seen. Straight away, the people started doubting that God would help them. They didn't think that they would be able to enter the land. The other spies also started to doubt.
No, we can't just attack those people.
Yeah, all the men we saw there were big and strong.
We felt like grasshoppers compared to them. And they probably felt the same.
That only made things worse.
If only we had died in Egypt.
If only we could die here in the wilderness.
Why did God lead us to this land, to fall by the sword and for our wives and children to be taken captive by the enemy?
Imagine suddenly they wanted to go back to Egypt. Joshua, Caleb, and Moses knew that it's a sin to doubt God, and now the people were doing it again. But Joshua and Caleb were thinking differently. They were in a spirit of faith.
Listen, God will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land. They are no more than a piece of bread for us."
The Israelites became so angry that they wanted to kill Joshua and Caleb. Then God had to stop the people himself.
How long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I have performed among them.
But Moses loved the people of Israel and asked God to forgive them. And because Moses was a faithful man, God decided to listen. God would bring the people into the land, but not without punishment. Because the people of Israel didn't believe, God would let them wander in the wilderness for 40 years before they could enter Canaan. The Israelites should have listened to Joshua and Caleb instead of doubting God. But Joshua held on to his faith and never doubted God's word about the promised land. But we'll hear more about that in the next episode. See ya! Oh, hi there. Today, I'm taking you 3,500 years back in time. Finally, I can tell you the rest of the story about a hero in the Bible called Joshua. He is a huge example for me. As I told you last time, Joshua became the leader of the Israelites. He was supposed to lead them into Canaan, the land that God had promised them. First, they had to walk around in the wilderness for 40 years as a punishment for not believing in God. But Joshua and Caleb believed, and when God said he would give the people a country, then they were sure he would do it. After 40 years, God let them enter Canaan. So, they got ready and took the Ark of the Covenant with them. The chest you see here. This was the holiest and most important thing the Jews possessed. They had been told by God to make it in gold, and on the top of it, they should make a lid with 2 angels. God spoke to the Israelites in between these 2 angels. And there were several other sacred things that should lie inside this chest. And they had to bring this whole chest into Canaan. However, they got stopped by a huge river, the Jordan.
How on earth are we supposed to get the coffin over to the other side?
But Joshua already knew God's plan.
You must just walk straight over.
And the first thing they met was the city of Jericho. It was surrounded by a massive wall. The people who lived there had already heard that the Israelites would come. So Jericho was completely closed. No one came out and no one came in. But the Israelites had to defeat Jericho if they were going to keep going into Canaan. They set up camp and had to figure out how to take this city. A man with a raised sword suddenly stood before Joshua.
Wait! Are you one of us, or do you belong to the enemy? Neither. I am the chief of the Lord's army. I have arrived.
Joshua understood that he was a messenger sent by God.
What does my lord have to say to his servant?" "Take off your shoes, for the place where you stand is holy ground."
Now Joshua listened carefully. God had promised Joshua that the Israelites would take Jericho, but the way he was going to take the city was quite strange. This was not going to be an ordinary conquest of a city. That was for sure. The next morning, Joshua told the people what God had said.
"The priests are to carry the Ark of the Covenant and get ready to walk. 7 priests shall walk in front of the Ark and blow their horns. Armed men with weapons will walk at the front, and the rest of the people will follow at the very back. And one more thing, you must not say a word until I give the order."
And so, they walked in complete silence around the city once and went back to the camp. I can imagine many were wondering what Joshua was doing. The next morning, everyone got up early and walked quietly around the city, once, just as before. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they were going to take the city. But before they left, Joshua gave a warning to everyone.
"We will take the city, but no one is to take anything for himself. All treasures are to be given into the treasure store for God."
This day, they went around the city 7 times. And when the horns blew for the 7th time, all the people shouted as loud as they could. Then the miracle happened. The walls of Jericho fell. And the Israelites could walk right into the city. The battle was won because Joshua had led the people exactly as God had told him. He was always obedient to God, and in this way, they continued to take the rest of Canaan. God helped them drive out their enemies, and the Israelites can now live peacefully in their new home. Well, thanks for following along. I'll see you in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya! Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,700 years back in time. Today, I want to tell you one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's the story of the Israeli prophet Elisha. He always heard God's voice, so he often gave the king advice on his next moves. At that time, Israel was at war with the king of the Syrians.
"We will send our armies here, here, and over there. The Israelis will have no chance of escaping."
Elisha was always listening to God, and God told him everything their enemies had planned.
Your Majesty, beware of passing by this place, because the Syrians will go down there.
The Israeli king did as told, and their army escaped the Syrians several times.
Somebody must have told them. Tell me, who among us is snitching to the Israelis?
No one, Your Majesty. It's Elisha, the Israelite prophet, who tells Israel's king the words that you speak, even in your bedroom.
Go and find out where he is.
Your Majesty, I heard he is right here in this town.
Well, go and capture him.
Oh no! Master! Master! What will we do?
Oh, boy, don't be afraid. There are more of us than there are of them.
What do you mean? We're two, and they are, I don't know, thousands?
Come outside with me, boy. Dear Lord, please open his eyes so that he may see. Dear Lord, strike this nation with blindness.
What happened? And where is that prophet?
This isn't the right road or the right city. Follow me, and I'll lead you to the man you are looking for. Just follow my voice. Keep going.
But Elisha had another plan in mind. He brought them right up to the Israeli king.
Dear Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see.
What? Where are we? Wait, this is a trap.
Elisha, should I kill them? Should I?
No, don't kill them. Did you capture them with your own sword or bow? Do you have the right to kill them? Put food and water in front of them so they can eat and drink and return to their master.
All right then.
Oh man, this is so good. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers!
Thank you so much.
Have a great trip home.
Goodbye.
Bye!
Bye.
Yes, you know. And then they let us go straight home.
What? Really? With such generosity, we better stop harassing them.
After that, the Syrians no longer attacked Israel, so they could live in peace. And the cool part of the story is this. Elijah knew that God was always watching over him, but his servant couldn't see that right away. He only saw the enemies right in front of them. When God opened the boy's eyes, he could suddenly see the huge army sent from heaven, always watching over them. The same goes for us. Sometimes, the only thing we can see are the difficulties right in front of us. But if we let God open up our eyes, we get to see how He's always watching over us. He will strengthen those who love Him, so we don't have to fear anything. Thanks for following along with this episode. We'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya! Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,400 years back in time. In this episode, you'll meet a man called Nehemiah. He used to live in Israel, but had to move to Persia because his home was taken by the enemies. All of this had happened because the Israelites were disobedient to God. Now, Nehemiah served the Persian king as his cupbearer, which was quite an important job. He did his job well and was appreciated by the king. But he longed to get back home to Israel. Nehemiah loved his people and his country, but most of all, he loved God, who chose the Jews to be his people.
We have guests, Your Majesty. They've come from Israel, but they're not asking to see you, Your Majesty. They've come to see your cupbearer.
Of course. Go speak with your guests, Nehemiah.
Dear brother, what's going on?
Nehemiah, I came to tell you, the Jews left in Jerusalem are in big trouble. The wall around the city is broken down and the gates have been destroyed by fire.
But that means our holy city, it's open for all enemies to take. Lord, God of heaven, please listen to the prayer of your servant. We have wronged you greatly. We haven't kept the commandments you gave us. But remember the word that you gave Moses. If we are unfaithful, you will scatter us among the peoples. But if we keep your commandments, you will gather our people and bring us to the place that you have chosen. Lord, listen to the prayer of your servant and those who honor your name. Amen.
Tell me, why are you so sad, Nehemiah? You're not sick, so you must have a broken heart.
Long live the king. But why shouldn't I be sad when my home is in ruins and its gates destroyed by fire?
So, what do you need?
Well, if it pleases the king, please send me home so that I can rebuild the walls of Jerusalem.
Okay, hold on a second. So, usually a question like that could easily get a servant killed. But Nehemiah knew that God was with him. So, he knew he did the right thing. Okay, alright, keep going.
How long will you be away, and when will you return? I will give you every permission needed, and my best soldiers will join you.
Phew.
Why have you come here?
For a visit.
You can't enter.
Yes, I can. We have the king's permission. See? Let's check out the damage done to the wall. Listen, Jews, priests, officers and officials. You see the trouble that we're in. Jerusalem is in ruins, and its gates are destroyed by fire. Come on, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we won't continue to be in disgrace. The Persian king gives us everything we need. God will make us succeed.
Yes, let's get this wall rebuilt.
I was wondering, why was it exactly Nehemiah that wanted to rebuild the wall? Because he lived all the way over in Persia. I think it was because he loved God so much. He couldn't just sit quietly and watch the holy city fall to ruins. He asked God for forgiveness of the sins of his people and promised to stay faithful. God saw that, and that's why he wanted to use Nehemiah. Next time, you'll see that it wouldn't be so easy to rebuild the wall. But because Nehemiah loved God and did as he commanded, God would help the Israelites in every situation. So, thanks for following along with this story, and we'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya! Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,400 years back in time. Finally, I can tell you the rest of the story of a man called Nehemiah. He was a Jew who had just returned to Jerusalem after his people had to flee the country. Because the Jews were disobedient to God, Jerusalem was burned down by their enemies. But Nehemiah loved his people and his country, and most of all, he loved God, who chose the Jews to be his people. So Nehemiah came back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem with his people. But not everybody was too happy about the building project going on. They had their own plans for Jerusalem.
Do they think they can fix things themselves? Do they think they can finish it in a day? Are they going to build the walls from the piles of rubble, even though they have been burned to the ground?
Even if a fox would climb on it, the wall would break.
But Nehemiah didn't listen to his negative neighbors. He just kept on working, trusting that God was with them.
Great work, everybody. We're halfway there already because you're working so hard.
But the wall is going to fall down. The stones are too broken. It's impossible to build.
Don't worry about it. God will support us in our work. It will succeed.
So the work on the walls is progressing, and the gaps are being closed. We have to do something.
Well, if we attack now, we can just walk through the gaps in the walls. Before they know it, we'll be inside the city to kill them and stop the work.
What a brilliant idea!
God had already warned Nehemiah about the attack. So they held guard day and night.
Everybody's very spread out along the wall. Listen, everybody. The enemy could attack at any moment. When you hear the trumpet sound, come and gather right here. Fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Remember, the Lord is great and powerful.
From this day on, the builders did their work with the load in one hand and a weapon in the other. And Nehemiah had everyone working on the lowest parts of the walls first.
They have found out. Their God has spoiled our plan. What a stupid idea you had. We'll have to try something else. A trap.
Dear Nehemiah, we have heard that the building project is going well, and that there are no gaps left in the wall. Great job. Let's meet together over here. Kind regards, your neighbors.
But they just want to trick me. No way I'm walking into their trap. Sorry, I have important work to do. I can't come over.
Can't come down? I have heard that you are building this wall just to rebel and become king yourself. Now, the king wants to hear about this. So come, let's talk together.
Huh? None of this is true. You're just making this up.
Why won't they come?
They tried tricking Nehemiah like this several times. But Nehemiah simply trusted God and kept on building the wall. and after just 52 days, the wall was finished.
But that's impossible. That kind of work could only be completed with the help of their god.
Who knows what else they're capable of?
I don't want to know.
You see, in order to get their city back, the Jews had to build and fight at the same time. But God was with them and gave them the city as promised. And the same goes for us. We're not building on an actual wall, but we have to guard our hearts in order to protect them from evil and keep them pure for God. Just as they were holding a load in one hand and a weapon in the other, we should always do the good and at the same time fight against evil. We have to watch especially out for weak spots where we know bad thoughts want to enter our hearts. With God's help, I can keep my heart pure and be a servant for God, just like Nehemiah. So thanks for following along with this story, and we'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya!
David the Shepherd Boy. Early one morning, Simon and Sarah heard a loud knock on the door. Who could it be, they wondered.
Huh? I'm faster than you. Oh, Grandad, it's you!
Hello, you two. I've got a little surprise for you.
Yes!
Here you are.
What's all this? Is it someone's birthday?
It's a present from Grandad. Oh wow, a sword! Great! I've got one too. Look at that! Yay!
Wow, how lucky are you?
I had some leftover wood in my workshop and I thought, now what could I make out of that?
Oh, Grandad, thank you. I love it. Me too. Thank you, Grandad. Now we can have sword fights, Simon. Come on, I challenge you. All right, but first you have to catch me.
Be careful, you two.
Simon, where are you? Ta-da! Gotcha! Now fight. All right. Watch out! Wow, you're fierce, but I'm not scared. Me neither. These are great swords, Grandad.
Here, sit down here and I'll tell you a story about a young boy in the Bible who had a lot of courage for fighting.
Yes, please, Grandad. We love your stories. Ah.
Well, this boy's name was David. And when he was young, his job was to be out in the fields, like these, watching over his father's sheep. Now, in those days, lions and bears lived in the woods and fields where the sheep were grazing, and sometimes a bear or a lion would pounce on a baby lamb or sheep and kill it.
Oh no!
But David really cared about the sheep and the lambs. The only weapon he had was his sling, not a sword like yours.
There you go.
But he used his sling on anything else he could lay his hands on. A stone, branch of a tree, and he stood and fought off any wild animal that tried to come near his sheep.
That was a really brave thing to do. He could have been attacked himself.
Yes. But even though he was young, he had the courage to fight for what is good, and he never doubted that God would help him, whatever happened.
The sheep and the lambs were too small to fight for themselves, but he fought for them.
Yes. Then one day, David was asked to go and take some food to his older brothers. who were soldiers fighting a battle against an enemy of Israel. When he got to the camp, he saw that all the soldiers were frightened of a great giant of a man in the enemy camp.
Cowards of Israel! Choose one of your men to fight me!
Even though they had all their armor on and swords in their hands, they were still afraid. David felt angry. He knew it was wrong that this giant was attacking God's people and making them afraid. He offered to fight him himself.
I will fight.
What's this?
You come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord.
He was too young to have a soldier's armor or weapons.
That's right. So he had to use what he had. He found some stones and picked one to put in his sling.
Ha!
And hurled it at the giant.
Yeah!
It hit the giant so hard that he fell down and died. David knew that God had power to help him in any danger, just as he had delivered him when he fought off the wild animals and defended the sheep.
Wow, he was so brave. Yes, but he did really put his trust in God.
Well, there aren't any lions or bears around in the fields these days, but we can still put our trust in God and fight for what's right.
On guard! Hey, that's my sword you've got, Derek.
Grandad's old Bible has become an exciting discovery for Leo and his friends. It's incredible that something which was written several thousand years ago still works. The reason for this is because God's word is true and God is the same now as he always was. Today, the children are ready to explore even more.
I am curious about one thing. There are people we read about in the Bible who are called heroes of faith. What does that actually mean? Heroes of faith.
The fact that they were heroes, that's easy to understand. They did things that were very brave and saved many others.
But were they superhumans? And that's why they were always so brave?
Well, I am not as brave as them, that's for sure. So I don't think I can become a hero like them.
You guys, can't we just get the verse of the day? Maybe we can get something that can give us an answer to that.
1,415. Exactly what I guessed. What does it say?
All things are possible for those who believe.
Possible for those who believe. That only has to mean one thing. That nothing is impossible if you believe. Those people we've read about, the heroes of faith, they were heroes because they believed in God.
Absolutely. Because they believed, they became heroes. Nothing is impossible for God. And when a person chooses to believe with all his heart, then God can use that person for big things. And now you're going to hear some exciting stories about this. You've probably heard about Moses, who received a task from God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. To begin with, he was scared to take on the task because he didn't think he was good enough, brave enough, to do it. But God said to him, he should do it, and God would be with him. So Moses believed God. Even before they had been let out of Egypt, there were many things Moses had to trust God for and hope that he would sort out for them, and God did. He performed miracles, and in the end, Pharaoh had to let them go. All of the Israelites prepared to leave. Thousands of people started to walk into the desert. At last, they weren't going to be slaves for the Egyptians anymore, and they could go back to the land that God had promised them. The Israelites were so happy. Full of courage and joy they went, until they arrived at the shores of the Red Sea. They set up camp there. After a long journey, they looked forward to a good rest. But suddenly, something happened. They could hear the sound of galloping hooves, and a cloud of dust rose up behind the hill. The army of Pharaoh was approaching. Pharaoh regretted that he had let them go, and now he wanted to kill them. The Israelites were petrified. They called out to Moses, full of fear and dread. Why did Moses bring them out here in the desert just to die? Moses looked up to heaven. Now God had to help him. Because Moses didn't understand how to deal with this situation, with this army, but Moses did not doubt, and he said to his people, "Do not be afraid. Stand fast, and you will see how God will deliver you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you." God didn't fail him. He spoke to Moses and said, "Tell the children of Israel to go forward. You shall lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall walk on dry ground through the midst of the sea. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they come after you, and I will show my glory to Pharaoh and his army. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." Moses went towards the sea. This vast sea was in front of him, glittering in the moonlight. Was it here his people were going to walk through the water completely dry and safe? He lifted his rod and held it over the water, and suddenly an east wind came. The sea started to divide. The waters rose up several meters high, either side of Moses. The Israelites could not believe their eyes. Amazed at God's power, they walked through the sea as God had said. An angel of God delayed the army of Pharaoh so they couldn't overtake them. The Israelites made it safely to the other side. The army galloped after them, but they shouldn't have done that, because the sea came in right on top of them and devoured them all. The Israelites were safe. They thanked God that he had saved them. Because of Moses' faith, they were all saved. If we look further in the Bible, we come to another story I also would like to tell you about. That is the story about three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three lived in Babylon. They were also Israelites, but had come to Babylon as prisoners of war. Even though they were far away from home, they hadn't forgotten what they had learned at home about God and his laws. They believed in God with all their hearts and did not let themselves be influenced by the idolatry which was common in Babylon. But one day, the king, whose name was Nebuchadnezzar, had a massive gold statue made as an idol. Now he wanted everyone in the country to bow down and worship this idol every time someone blew on a musical instrument. If they didn't, the king would throw them into a fiery furnace. The people were terrified of going against the king, so they did as he told them to. If they had heard an instrument playing, they dropped to their knees and worshipped. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not do it. They believed in God, who was the only God. To worship something else would be a betrayal against God, so they refused. Pretty soon, someone went to the king and told him about them. The king was furious and asked his soldiers to bring the three friends to him immediately. The king shouted at them and said that next time they heard the sound of a flute or a horn, they should immediately bow down to the statue. Otherwise, he would throw them into the fiery furnace. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "We do not need to respond to this. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden statue." Now the king became so furious, he almost couldn't control himself. He shouted at him that he would have his soldiers make the furnace 7 times hotter so they would suffer a terrible death. So he got his soldiers to tie the men and drag them towards the furnace. The soldiers threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the flames. It was so hot that the soldiers themselves collapsed outside the furnace. The king sat on the throne, pleased with himself. He thought, they got what they deserved. But suddenly his smirk disappeared and he turned white with shock. In the furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had stood up. They were no longer tied up, and there was a fourth person standing in the midst of them. A person the king had never seen before and who hadn't been thrown into the fire with the others. He looked like a son of God. They were walking around freely in the furnace, and the fire didn't hurt any of them. The king ran towards the furnace. He called out to them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of God, the Almighty, come out here." The men walked out of the furnace and stood in front of the king. The king realized that they served a God who was real, who was alive, and had all power. King Nebuchadnezzar didn't want to hurt them anymore, but instead made sure they lived safely in the land and that no one mocked the God they served. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego believed in God, and he rewarded them. And therefore, we can read about them today.
I want to believe as well, because everything is possible for those who believe.
Then God can use us too, even though we are young.
Yes!
Jesus has many wonderful things he wants to teach us, all of which we find in the Bible. After Leo inherited his grandfather's old Bible, do you think he and his friends want to find out more about what is in this book? Can they find something here that can help them too, as Grandpa experienced?
Hi, have you started already? I didn't want to leave school until my big sister was ready to come with me.
You just made it. We weren't going to begin without you.
Now we are going to spin the Wheel of Fortune.
I think it will be yellow.
I bet it will be blue.
Thanks.
There you go.
And it's page 1364.
Something is underlined here.
Yes, it's written here. Do not be anxious about anything, but bring everything on your heart to God. Pray and call on him with thanksgiving.
There were several words I didn't understand.
Don't be anxious. Does it mean to not be afraid?
What else was there? Bring everything on your heart to God. Pray and call on him with thanksgiving.
You're quite right. Not to be anxious is the same as not being afraid of what is going to happen or how to get something done. Everything that I have in my heart, what I think about, I can tell God and Jesus about. Then we do not have to worry about things. We trust Jesus that everything will turn out well. Jesus loves to help us. The Bible is full of stories of people who have asked God for help and received it. Now you're going to hear the story of a very special lady. Her name is Esther. In a country called Persia, there once lived a king. He wanted a beautiful queen. It was therefore decided that all the most beautiful young women in the country should be sent to the castle. Then the king could choose a wife. In the castle, where the beautiful women were to live, a man named Mordecai worked. He was a Jew, but had come to the country as a prisoner of war. He worked in the castle, and he was a good man. Mordecai had a young cousin who became an orphan as a child. She was named Esther and had grown up with Mordecai. He was very fond of her and treated her like a daughter. Now Esther had become a young and very beautiful woman, and she was one of those who moved into the castle so that the king could meet her. Before she left, Mordecai asked Esther not to tell anyone that she was a Jew. In Persia, it was dangerous to say you were a Jew, and Mordecai didn't want Esther to be hurt. Esther had become a wise lady, and she did not reveal to anyone that she was a Jew. There were a lot of new things she had to learn in the castle, and she could easily have been scared of what awaited her. But Esther believed in God and knew that she could pray to him for help and advice. The ladies of the castle were to visit the king one by one. When it was Esther's turn, she was dressed in the finest clothes, and she was amazingly beautiful when she went in to see the king. He immediately fell in love with her, and soon after, he chose her to be queen. Becoming a queen was a great task and honour, but it was also a little scary, because a queen always had to behave just right, or else she could be punished. It was the king who had all the power. Many important people worked in the castle. The most important of them was a man named Haman. He had a lot of power, and the king relied heavily on him. The others in the castle, and in the palace where Esther had lived, were probably a little afraid of Haman. No one would speak to him, and if he passed them, they would bow as deeply as they could. Haman passed by where Mordecai worked. Since Mordecai was a Jew, he believed in God and would not therefore bow to Haman as if Haman were a god. Haman immediately noticed this and became very angry. In fact, he became so angry that he decided to punish Mordecai. But he decided he would not just punish Mordecai, but all Jews throughout Persia. So he made a plan to get the king to kill all the Jews throughout the great kingdom. He went in to see the king and said, "In your kingdom live a people who keep to themselves. They have other laws than all other peoples, and they do not obey the king's laws." Haman made the king believe that the Jews did not obey the laws of the land and that they would cause trouble. Kings could not accept such a thing at that time. The king therefore wrote a law that all the Jews in the kingdom should be killed, and that it should happen on a certain day quite soon. When Mordecai heard this news, he was completely distraught. The other Jews also heard about it, and everyone cried and prayed to God. Soon Queen Esther also heard about it. She sent her servant to talk to Mordecai, and Mordecai asked the servant to tell the queen that she had to go to the king and ask for mercy for the Jews. "No, I can't," Esther said. "Everyone knows that if anyone enters the king's rooms without being invited, then they're killed, even the queen. Only if the king reaches out his golden rod do you get to live." But Mordecai pleaded with Esther again, saying, "If you do not go into the king, you will have to die anyway, for all Jews will be killed, and you are also a Jew. Maybe you became queen just for this moment, to save your people." Then Esther realized that she had to be brave. Maybe God would use her to save the Jews. She asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in the city, and that for 3 days and nights they should pray to God that he would save them and let them live. Esther would do the same in the castle. Then after 3 days, she would go in to see the king. On the third day, Esther put on her finest clothes. Then she went to the king's castle. Maybe the king would get angry, maybe not. Now she had prayed to God for 3 days, and she knew that God was with her and would help her. She continued to walk until she stood before the king's throne. She waited. The king smiled at her and held out his gold rod. Esther came forward and touched the staff. She was allowed to live. In the days that followed, Queen Esther met the king several times, and finally she explained to the king what misfortune the Jews had come to, and that she too could be killed because of the law Haman had made the king decide. The king was completely horrified. He had no idea what he had done. He asked Esther for help in making a new law that saved the Jews. The vicious Haman received the most severe punishment, and Mordecai was hired as the king's chief servant. The fact that Queen Esther prayed to God was what gave her strength to save her people.
She was so brave.
Or maybe she wasn't really that brave by personality, but she prayed to God and he made her brave. And then God saved them. It's amazing. We never have to be afraid. We can pray about absolutely everything.
The children have been spending some lovely holiday days at Grandpa's small farm. Lily, Michael and Leo are making the most of these fine summer evenings to hear more stories about the heroes of faith. For the Bible explorers now know they can learn a lot from these stories.
I'm wondering how things are going with Alexander in my class.
Alexander? Is he the one who's feeling a bit low?
Yes, I don't think he's felt that good lately because there are some kids who tease him quite a bit. I've seen it many times.
Huh? What do you say when you see it?
No, I haven't really said much because I don't dare. I'm not very good at talking when a lot of people look at me.
Do you know what, Michael? I can understand that you feel that way. But we can learn to be brave so that we can say and do what we know is right.
Can we?
We can. It's something we have to practice, though. You've heard of Paul, haven't you? He wrote a letter to a young friend named Timothy, and in the first letter, in chapter 4, verse 12, it says, "Let no one despise you because you are young, but be an example to the believers in word and deed."
What does it mean to be despised?
It means that other people don't think much of you, and that makes me unhappy and lacking in confidence. Then I don't dare to do or say what I really should. So if we don't let ourselves be despised, it means we don't let the fear of what the others think rule us.
We should not let anyone despise us, but be an example.
Yes, I'll tell you a story about someone who probably practiced a lot with just that. And that's why she became a hero in Israel. She saved the whole country.
Oh, I want to hear that story.
What I'm going to tell you goes way back in the history of the Israelites. They are God's people, and God had promised that when they were faithful to Him and kept the laws He had given them, He would bless them greatly. But that promise also had another side. Because if the Israelites turned away from God and didn't care about God's laws and began praying to other gods, then God would have to turn away from them. And then the blessing would be completely gone and a curse would come upon them. The Israelites knew that very well, actually, yet they failed God. God chose some very faithful men to be judges in Israel to help Israel to do the good. God gave the judges wisdom and spoke to them so that they could make the people return to God.
What is a judge?
You probably know what a football referee is, don't you? He makes sure that the rules are followed, and if someone breaks the rules, the judge decides the punishment. Well, a judge in Israel decided in cases where, for example, some disagreed or had violated God's law, and in addition, they could hear God speak to them. So it helped the country to have such judges. But every time a judge got old and died, the Israelites started going off the rails again. God therefore had to curse the land. Kings in neighbouring countries began to take war against Israel, and especially a king named Jabin. He sent his commander with all his soldiers and chariots into Israel, and for 20 years they were tormenting the Israelites. It was a very difficult time, and God found almost no Israelites he could use to speak to the people so they could finally become faithful to him again. Then God did something really unusual for that time. He found a woman called Deborah. She was called by God to be a prophet and a judge in Israel. God could use her. I can imagine that many people found it strange, and Deborah probably had to choose not to care what others were thinking. She trusted God, and because he had called her, she did it. After she became a judge, she sat in judgment in lawsuits for the people of Israel. But she also knew well what was happening around the country, and she knew about King Jabin and his commander, who had been tormenting the country for 20 years. Deborah couldn't just sit and watch anymore. Was there no one in this country of all the strong men and warriors of the Israelites who could take up the fight against them? Deborah knew that God was telling her that this had to stop. Israel had to get this enemy out of the country. She was no warrior or commander, but she knew that if God was with them, they could win any battle. So she asked Barak, who was a brave warrior, to come and see her. She said to him to take 10,000 men to a certain place, and there they would lure the enemy in and would beat them with God's help. Barak replied, "If you go with me, I'll go. But if you don't go, I won't go either."
Huh? Did he want Deborah with him in the war?
He did. He didn't dare go alone. He probably realised that Deborah had a courage and a faith in God that was stronger than his. Then Deborah said, "Yes, I'll go with you, but then you won't be the one who gets the honour for the victory." Then Deborah prophesied that the war would succeed, but that the mighty commander of the enemy, of whom everyone had been so afraid, would be beaten by a woman. And that's exactly how it turned out. God was with them and made the enemy's soldiers and horses completely confused, so they couldn't fight, and Israel won a crushing victory. But the enemy commander got away. Barak knew that they had to find this commander-in-chief for the victory to be absolutely certain, so he set off after him and searched everywhere to find him. Then Deborah's second prophecy came true, for the commander hid with a woman who he thought would not be able to hurt him. But there he was wrong, for the lady killed the commander and the war was won. The Israelites could finally live in peace in their country Thanks to Deborah's courage and trust in God. She didn't care what others thought, just what God wanted her to do.
I want to be just as brave and not care what the others think.
That's great, Michael. It starts with us deciding, and then of course we have to practice it. And when I think of myself as a servant of God, then I know I can trust that God is with me. And that's why I don't have to be afraid or sad about what others think. God is the greatest, most powerful and strongest, and I am his servant.
Then we can be really good examples.
After a lovely summer day, Grandfather has lit a fire and called Leo, Michael and Lily. They come as quickly as they can because a fire means a good time, and not least, good stories. No one can tell Bible stories like Grandfather can.
It's really nice and warm here.
I was getting a bit cold, so this is really nice.
I love sitting around a fire.
Yes, me too.
This day has been absolutely perfect.
I feel like it's so easy to be happy when we are here. I don't think I've been grumpy once while we've been here.
Do you sometimes get grumpy, Leo?
It can happen. But sometimes it's more like I kind of get sad. At school anyway.
At school? How come?
Because recently, it's kind of been happening that people think I'm really lame because I believe in Jesus and what's written in the Bible.
It has?
It's just some people, but they say things that make me feel really stupid. It almost makes me want to just pretend I'm not a Christian, but that doesn't feel right.
I know that's no fun, Leo. You know what? Jesus actually told his disciples that they would experience the same thing, because the world doesn't want to believe, said Jesus. And that's why we who choose to believe aren't always understood.
Why did Jesus tell them that?
I believe he said it so they'd know beforehand, but also to tell them that they would get a huge reward when they choose to hold on to their faith anyway.
So you mean that we shouldn't be embarrassed because of our faith?
Absolutely not. I want to give you a Bible verse, which is a promise from God. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you.
To draw near to God, does that mean to pray to him?
Yes, that too. But it also means to fight for your faith, and to do that which is God's will. Then God will be very close to me, especially when I experience something difficult. Do you want to hear a story about someone who did just that?
Yes, please.
Once the king of Babylon attacked Jerusalem and took many Israelites captive. One of the men taken captive was called Daniel. He was taken as a prisoner to Babylon. Daniel was a special young man. He was very talented, and the king of Babylon quickly realized he could be of use to the country. Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were chosen for special training so that they could serve the king in the palace. The king had decided what things they were allowed to eat and drink so they would stay fit and healthy. But Daniel and his friends couldn't eat it because God had given the Israelites really special laws about what they were allowed to eat and drink. The food the king gave them was actually the best food you can think of. So it would seem very strange to ask for something else. But for Daniel, what God thought about him was more important than what the king might say, or what the others did. So he went to the man in charge of them and asked if he and his 3 friends could get the kind of food that God's laws allowed them to eat. Now God
put a care for Daniel into the heart of the man in charge of them. He wanted to help them, but he was afraid that the food that Daniel wanted to eat wouldn't keep them as healthy as the others. And if that happened, he would be in big trouble from the king. Daniel trusted God and suggested that they try the diet out for 10 days. They would get vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then he could see how Daniel and his friends looked compared to the others who had eaten the king's food. When the 10 days were up, it was clear that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had become healthier and stronger than the others. God was with them and helped them so that they could continue to be faithful to God's laws. God also gave them knowledge and understanding about all kinds of literature and wisdom that they studied at the palace. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams. When their training was over, they were led before the king to be interviewed by him. And none of the other young men could match Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego. So they served the king. And when the king asked their advice in matters which needed wisdom and understanding, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm.
So when Daniel and his friends did what they knew God wanted them to do, then God helped them.
God doesn't forget anyone who wants to obey him. He will always help them. But the story doesn't stop there.
And what happened next?
The years passed, and one day there was a new king. His name was Darius. He was pleased with Daniel and the good job he did. He gave Daniel a high position in the country together with 2 others. But Daniel was much smarter than the other 2. For this reason, the king wanted to make Daniel responsible for the whole kingdom. The other 2 didn't like this at all. They were so jealous that they started to look for things Daniel could have done wrong in his work. But they couldn't find anything. Then they said to each other, "We won't find anything to accuse Daniel of unless we find something to say about the God he worships." They knew that Daniel believed in God and that the most important thing for Daniel was to keep God's commandments. So they made a cunning plan. They went to the king and said to him, "King Darius, may you live forever. We have all had a meeting and believe that the king should make a law that says, for 30 days, anyone who prays to anyone other than you, O king, whether to a god or a person, shall be cast into the lion's den. Make such a law, O king, and write it down." Darius didn't realize what it was they were scheming, so he sat down and wrote out the law they had suggested, and the law the king had signed could never be reversed. As soon as Daniel learned of the law, he went into his house and his room, and he had an open window that faced Jerusalem. 3 times a day he fell on his knees in prayer and praise to his God, just as he had done before. Then the men stormed in and found Daniel as he prayed. Now they had something they could go to the king with. Pleased with themselves, they went before the king. "O king, did you not pass a law that for 30 days anyone who prayed to anyone other than you, O king, should be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "Indeed, that has not changed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel doesn't care about you or the command you gave. He prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was in despair. He loved Daniel, and he didn't want him to die. He thought and thought about how he could save him. Right up until sunset, he tried to find a solution. Then the men rushed to the king again and said to him, "O king, remember that no law which the king has given and no decision he has made can be changed." Then the king had no choice but to say that they should fetch Daniel and throw him into the lion's den. But the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you worship continuously, save you." And then they threw Daniel down into the den and closed the entrance with a large stone. Afterwards, the king went to his palace. That night, he couldn't eat or sleep. He was so restless because of Daniel and what had taken place. Early in the morning, as soon as it was light, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached it, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, hoping that he might still be alive. "Daniel, you are the servant of the living God. Has your God, whom you worship continuously, been able to save you from the lions?" Then Daniel answered from the bottom of the lion's den, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and closed the lions' mouths, so they didn't harm me. For I am innocent before him, and against you, O king, I have also done no wrong." The king was so happy and told the soldiers to lift Daniel out of the den. He came up completely unharmed, for he had trusted in God.
He wasn't afraid to say what he believed in.
The only thing that was important for Daniel was to stay close to God. No matter what would happen or where he was, he would do God's will. And God stayed close to him.
That's what I want to do too.
Yes, me too.
It's been another really lovely day on the farm at Grandfather's house. Leo, Lily and Michael have been playing all day long, but they've also helped Grandad with a couple of errands. Now the sun is sinking down behind the hill, and that means an evening by the fire.
Hey, Grandad, I've been thinking about something. Why is it if I give something to someone or bless others, I actually become happy?
Yeah, well observed, Lily. You know, it's because it's a law of life. He who blesses will be blessed.
A law of life?
Yeah, it's a law that God has laid down throughout creation for everything that lives. You may have heard more about natural laws, like if you drop a rock, it falls to the ground. But just as we have laws of nature, we have laws of life that God has determined. Whether you believe in God or not, you experience them.
Like being happy when you are kind to others.
Yes, but there's another law of life I'd like to tell you about, because it's perhaps the most important of all the laws of life.
Oh, we'd really like to hear that.
We can find it in the letter written by the disciple James in chapter 4, verse 6. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Okay, but what does that mean?
The first bit may not be so difficult to understand. God resists those who are proud, or you can say stubborn, those who think they know best. They just do whatever they want to do, and God can't give grace to a person like that.
What do you mean by give grace?
Grace. That is help from God. Without it, our lives would be completely destroyed, for we depend on God's grace and God's blessing to thrive.
It said that the humble, they get grace.
Yeah, absolutely true. Being humble, that doesn't mean having low self-esteem or hanging your head, but it means I've got to be completely honest and admit how little I understand about how I am. I don't pretend that I can do everything or that I know everything. Someone who is humble will learn from God and do his will. If I am humble, I also accept the advice of others. For example, you children, you need to listen to what Mum and Dad have to say to you and take advice. That is what is being humble.
Don't you have a story then, Grandad, about someone who was like that? Humble?
Yeah, I think so. I would really like to tell you about a man named Noah, for he was humble and he received grace from God. After Adam and Eve, there were more and more people on the earth. The years passed and more were born. At that time, people lived till they were very, very old, so eventually there were many people living on the earth. But as we have seen many times in these stories, men quickly began to forget God. They wouldn't keep God's laws and commandments, but they did what was evil in God's sight. Noah lived at this time. Unlike everyone else, he was someone who believed in God and who did God's will. It says he was a righteous man. But the other people did all kinds of evil. It was so bad that God was filled with sorrow and regretted that he created man. To put an end to all the violence and sin, God decided he would send a great flood that would exterminate all life on earth and get rid of all the evil. But God hadn't forgotten Noah. He didn't want to let him die, for Noah was humble and obedient to God. God spoke to Noah and explained that a great flood would come upon the earth. He asked Noah to build a gigantic boat, an ark. He was to bring his family there when God told him. Noah had a wife and 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and they each had their own wives. God wanted to save all of them. But God also had a plan for the animals. In addition to Noah and his family, the ark was to house a pair of all animals and birds, so that the animal species could live on after the flood. With some animals, God asked for extra numbers of them. It was going to be useful when the flood was over, so that Noah and his family would get enough food. The ark was to have 3 floors. There'd be many rooms and only a single door into the boat. Boats may not have been common at all where Noah actually lived. But imagine it, without anyone else knowing why, Noah started building a huge boat on land. I can imagine that other people who lived in the area thought Noah was strange. Maybe they laughed at him. And building a boat like that is tremendously hard work. It certainly took a very long time. But Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth didn't care what people thought or how much work it was. They did every single thing that God had said. In that way, Noah showed that he was very humble. God had said it, so he didn't ask questions or try to do it in a slightly easier way. No, he did exactly as God had said.
But how did they manage to build such a big boat far inland? How would they make it float?
For a long time, they built the boat on dry land. But one day it was going to float on an ocean larger than anyone had ever seen before. When the boat was finished, God asked Noah and his family to enter the ark. The animals and birds were brought in, as God had said, and they filled all the rooms. Then God closed the door. Just imagine what it must have looked like. One family and all those animals inside a giant ark resting on the ground. 7 days went by without anything happening. They were just waiting. But then, on the 7th day, something happened. The windows of heaven opened and it rained like no one had ever seen before. And not only that, the sea and the rivers and the streams of the earth opened up. And the whole earth was inundated with water. The flood had come, and it lifted the whole ark up so it floated. The water rose, and eventually it covered all the mountains. The whole earth had now disappeared underwater. The ark floated alone on the vast sea. So for 40 days and 40 nights it rained, and then it became calm. All life on earth was gone, only those in the ark remained alive. God didn't forget them. He stopped the rain and sent a wind which drove the water back little by little. The water sank and the ark was stranded at the top of Mount Ararat. I don't think there were windows in the boat because Noah and his family didn't know anything about what it looked like around them. So Noah opened a hatch in the ceiling and released a raven. It flew back and forth as the water continued to subside. Then Noah let out a dove. But the dove couldn't find anywhere to rest, so it returned to the boat. Noah waited another 7 days, and then he sent the dove out again. This time, it came back with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. So the earth began to appear again. Noah waited another 7 days before releasing the dove, and this time it didn't come back. Then Noah and his family realized that the water had receded completely and the earth was dry again. God spoke to Noah and told him to go out of the ark. Noah, his family, and all the animals, now it was time for a new start. Once again, Noah did just as God said. Once he had left the boat, Noah built an altar to God where he sacrificed. God had saved him and his whole family. He had received grace. God saw Noah's sacrifice and gratitude, and he wanted to continue to do Noah good. He wanted to bless him. In fact, it says that when Noah sacrificed to God, God decided he would never again send such a flood of water over the earth. God gave a promise to Noah, and as proof of that promise, God created a rainbow in the sky. Every time it appears, it reminds God of the promise he made to his friend Noah.
So the rainbow is created by God, as a reminder that there will never again be such a flood over the earth. That's cool.
I think maybe Noah is my favourite hero of faith. Just imagine, he was that faithful to God. Even when no one else was, he did exactly as God said. Really, he saved all mankind.
Exactly. He was humble, and God gave him a very special grace.
That's how I want to be too. Humble.
Then God will also give you great grace, and then you can be absolutely sure it will really go well with you.
One day, God spoke to the prophet Samuel and asked him to go to Bethlehem. A man called Jesse lived there. He had many sons. God had chosen one of them to be the new king of Israel, and Samuel was to go and anoint the one he had chosen.
God wants a king with a pure heart who is faithful to him. And he's chosen a new one from among the sons of Jesse. I wonder who it can be.
Is that you, Prophet Samuel? What brings you here to Bethlehem?
You're Jesse, aren't you? Just the man I want. I have an important secret message from God. Call your sons.
Jesse gathered his sons together. They were all strong, handsome men.
This must be the one the Lord's chosen.
Do not look at his appearance or how tall he is. I have rejected him. People do not see what the Lord sees, because people see what is on the outside. But the Lord sees the heart.
No, the Lord hasn't chosen any of these. Are these all the sons you have?
There's still David, the youngest, but he's looking after the sheep.
You'll never guess what happened today. There was a bear.
Anoint him. He is the one.
What?
The Lord who looks at the heart has chosen David as king over Israel.
Nobody found out what Samuel had done in Bethlehem. When the time was right, God was going to replace the current king, Saul. But until that time, David was to continue being a shepherd with his father.
David, be careful. Remember, it's a real war, and our enemies, the Philistines, are dangerous. Take this food to your brothers who are fighting, but come back right away.
Yes, I'll be careful.
David thought it was exciting to be in the camp. But then something happened that would change everything. A giant from the Philistine army started to mock the God of Israel and their army.
Cowards of Israel! Choose one of your men to fight me. If he wins, we will be your servants. But if I win, then you will serve us!
Who is this Philistine who insults the armies of the living God?
He is Goliath. He's been doing this for 40 days. The king has promised a great reward, but no one dares to fight him.
That's terrible. Isn't there any mighty warrior who will fight for God's glory? I will fight, and God will deliver me from this Philistine.
Who do you think you are? You take care of the sheep. What arrogance!
Saul heard that there was someone in Israel's army who wanted to fight Goliath. The king wanted to meet him.
So, young man, I hear you have big words about fighting this giant. But you're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was young.
King Saul, the Lord, who delivered me from the claws of the lion and the bear, he will deliver me from this Philistine. God is with me.
Okay then, no harm trying, I suppose. Go and the Lord be with you. I just hope that young upstart doesn't cause trouble.
What's this? Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? Come here and I'll kill you!
You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord. Today, he will let me defeat you, and I will cut off your head, and then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and that the battle is the Lord's.
That David is certainly a warrior, even though he is so young. But I need him close to me so that I can keep an eye on him. I think I'll make him a commander in the army.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Should I fear anyone? No one!
In faith to God, David had defeated the great and fearsome Goliath. And this was the start of a new era for the young shepherd boy. the one who would one day become the King of Israel.